I want to talk about Christian nationalism because I want to hear from you what you think's going on. Here's what I think's going on. When people first started talking about Christian nationalism, at least on a bigger scale on social media a few years ago, I was immediately called a Christian nationalist because I had written this article for Gospel Coalition that had nothing, no thing at all to do with politics, but it had to do with defending biblical authority and the deity of Jesus. I can't even remember. It was just theological stuff. And it was the first article I wrote that kind of went viral on progressive Christian Twitter, right? And people were calling me a white Christian nationalist. All these Trump memes were, I was like, what is happening? And I didn't understand back then. I understand it now. I fully get why they were doing that now because I understand how this social justice narrative kind of marries itself with the Christian narrative or Christian nationalist narrative. But then we saw real Christian nationalists kind of pop up. And it seems like they're gaining some steam. It's this small but very loud group that I think is dangerous, but I think it's very small. I think the vast majority of the way people are using the phrase Christian nationalist is as a pejorative, as a slur to silence people that disagree with them politically. And I know that's more the definition you were kind of focusing on in your book, on your chapter 6, which is dangerous Christian nationalists. That's what we're viewed as if you have a biblical worldview, even if you reject this sort of theological Christian nationalism that's popping up on social media. Even if you reject that, you're still called a dangerous Christian nationalist. Help people understand like what's going on. Why are they being called that?
So anytime the subject of Christian nationalism comes up, you have to ask someone, well, what do you mean by Christian nationalism? So if someone's upset about Christian nationalism, you've got to ask that question because everyone is using the term in a different way. And there's really no set standard for what it means. And so, like you said, you kind of have some people in a certain corner who are talking about some theological versions of it. And then you have what the mainstream media is talking about.
Yeah, that's right.
And my chapter is specifically dangerous Christian nationalists. That's the view from mainstream media. And so I don't get into the theological debates about that are happening in some small corners because overwhelmingly that's not what mainstream media is talking about. And I'm
Yeah.
going to say overwhelmingly just to be conservative, but that's just I never see that they're not talking about the theological debates. What they're talking about when they're saying this is extreme and it's dangerous and it's theocratic and it's anti-democratic and we have to watch out for these Christian nationalists, it's scary and it's on the rise. When you see these articles, I surveyed hundreds of them. And when you go into them or you watch the videos and you actually look for the examples that they're giving so that you know what they're labeling Christian nationalism, it's nearly always only referring to conservative positions that are unpopular on moral topics like
Yeah.
abortion, gender, and sexuality. I mean, that's what it boils down to in the vast, vast majority of the cases. And so, for example, you can read a headline about how scary this is that these Christian nationalists are really pushing for certain ideas. And when you get into the article, all it's talking about is something about how people want to block gender transition surgeries for minors, or it's about really just advocating for a pro-life policy. You see this over and over, but it gets labeled as Christian nationalism. But what I explained in that chapter is that if you really try, and this is what I'm trying to do in the book, is to get into the mentality of why people are saying what they are. So I just explained what they're saying, but to understand the why, you have to take it back another level. And for them to call it theocratic and anti-democratic is for them to presuppose that there's a problem with using your religious views to advocate for your policies in society. So it goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier that, oh, you want to quote unquote legislate morality. You want to impose your views, but hey, those are religious. We have separation of church and state.
Yeah.
That's the mentality. So if you have some kind of, religious worldview of some kind that's leading you to say, hey, I'm going to advocate for life for preborn babies, then they say, well, you're imposing religious values and that's a problem. That's theocratic. That's anti-democratic. Well, we have to understand, okay, a theocracy is a form of government that formally recognizes some kind of deity as the official deity of that country. There's virtually no one who is advocating for that. We can see the corners of the internet, like you're saying. You can find some people who are talking about that. That's not even what the mainstream media themselves are claiming is
Right.
going on. They're just using the sloppy language to
Mhm.
make an emotional plea toward people that, oh, that's so theocratic. That's so somehow based in your view of God, as if that's a problem. And then they say it's anti-democratic because they're presupposing that it's somehow a problem that you're working around the democratic process by trying to impose these religious views. The reality is that we're using our democracy, or our constitutional republic as it is actually, that we're using that exactly the way that it's intended to be used.
Yeah.
So the First Amendment says that that Congress cannot establish a state religion. There's not going to be a formally supported state religion. We're not paying taxes into a state church, for example, and you cannot be forced to practice a certain religion. That has nothing to do with whether individuals who are committed to the authority of a religion in their given life, whatever religion that is, that has nothing to do with their ability to advocate for their own values, their own beliefs in the public square. These are two completely different issues. And yet it's the media will make you think that it's a problem. And it's a lack of civic knowledge on a lot of people,
Mhm.
on a lot of Christians, to think, well, we really can't bring our views to bear in the public square because they're religious. That's not even a biblical problem. That is just a lack of knowledge in
Mhm.
terms of how our government works, how history works, what separation of church and state is. So in my book, I really focus on trying to equip Christians with the biblical, the cultural, and the civic understanding that we need in order to be able to advocate for these things. But we're not anti-democratic or theocratic for bringing our views to bear any more than somebody
Yeah.
else is for bringing theirs.